Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the new Sorcerer Supreme after Doctor Strange vanished? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was a symphony of chaos, and Izuku Midoriya was its unwilling conductor. Concrete dust, thick and acrid, filled his lungs with every ragged breath. The air vibrated with the percussive bass of Bakugo's explosions and the sharp, crystalline crackle of Todoroki's ice. Somewhere to his left, Ida's engines roared like a fighter jet on a low pass. To his right, Uraraka's cheerful battle cries were a strange, hopeful counterpoint to the screams of terrified civilians and the guttural roars of the villain's hired muscle. This was supposed to have been a simple patrol, a routine sweep of the Kamino Ward reconstruction zone with a handful of other Class 1A students. It was meant to be a show of force, a symbol of the resilience of Heroes Society after the fall of All Might. But resilience, Deku was learning, was a magnet for those who wished to test it. The League of Villains offshoot, calling themselves the Reality Breakers, were less an organization and more a glorified gang centered around one man with a terrifyingly powerful quirk. Their leader, a wiry man in a cheap pinstriped suit and a domino mask that did little to hide the manic glee in his eyes, called himself Warpgate. His quirk, Phase Rift, allowed him to tear open short-lived, unstable portals. They weren't the clean, precise warps of someone like Kurogiri. These were violent, jagged wounds in the fabric of space-time, shimmering like oil on water over a chasm of fractured light. Keep him contained. Todoroki's voice cut through the din, sharp and focused. A massive wall of ice erupted from the pavement, seeking to box Warpgate in. But the villain just laughed, waving a dismissive hand. A shimmering tear, no bigger than a dinner plate, opened in the path of the ice glacier. The massive projectile didn't stop. It simply vanished into the rift, leaving a perfectly circular hole in its mass. A second later, another rift opened high above them, and the stolen spear of ice plummeted down towards a residential building. "I've got it!" Uraraka shouted, her hands already pressed together. She slapped her palms onto the falling ice spear, her quirk activating. Release! The behemoth of frozen water lost its weight, floating harmlessly down like a grotesque snowflake. Deku watched it all, his mind a frantic storm of calculations. Green lightning, the raw energy of One for All, crackled around him, tracing the lines of his costume and stinging his skin. He was maintaining full cowling at 45%, a percentage that was becoming more manageable but still left a profound, burning ache deep in his bones. It was a constant, humming reminder of the borrowed power thrumming beneath his skin. Warpgate's portals have a delay of about 1.2 seconds between closing one and opening another, he muttered under his breath, his eyes tracking the villain's every move. He can redirect attacks, but he can't seem to control the exit point with perfect accuracy. He's aiming for chaos, not precision. The rifts themselves are unstable. Look at the edges, they flicker. Maybe they have a physical or energetic weakness. Stop mumbling and start smashing, you damn nerd. Bakugo's voice was a familiar explosion in his ear. The blonde hero shot past him, propelled by a series of controlled blasts, his gauntlets smoking. He was herding the last of Warpgate's thugs away from the main fight, his AP shots acting as non-lethal, high-impact deterrents. "I'm clearing the trash. You and I see how to deal with the main event." For a moment, their coordination was perfect, a testament to the brutal training they had endured together at Yui. Bakugo created an opening, Todoroki exploited it, and Deku prepared to be the hammer. "Todoroki-kun, on my mark!" Deku yelled, crouching low. "I need a clear path." Todoroki nodded, his expression grim. He stomped his right foot, and a ramp of smooth, sheer ice shot from the ground, angling directly towards the smirking Warpgate. Simultaneously, he unleashed a torrent of flame from his left hand, forcing the villain to focus his attention and open another defensive rift. This was their chance. Now, Deku exploded forward. The 45% of One for All felt like a physical detonation in his legs. The world became a green-tinged blur. He was a lightning bolt streaking up the ice ramp, his right arm pulled back, power gathering in his fist like a miniature sun. He could feel the spirits of the previous OFA users, a silent, encouraging chorus in the back of his mind. For them. For all might. For everyone. Detroit Smash. He roared the name of the move, not just for effect, but as a focus for the immense power he was about to unleash. This had to be it. He had to be faster than the 1.2-second delay. He had to strike before Warpgate could react. But the villain wasn't just manic, he was desperate. And desperation bred a dangerous kind of creativity. The gleam in Warpgate's eyes turned to sheer, unadulterated panic. He couldn't open a rift to redirect the attack in time. Deku was too fast. So, he did the only thing he could. Instead of creating a portal in front of him, he screamed and tore a hole in reality right where Deku was about to land his punch. It wasn't a neat circle this time. It was a scream made visible, a jagged, sprawling fissure of kaleidoscopic light that ripped open the space directly in Deku's path. The air warped around it, bending light and sound into a horrifying vortex. Time seemed to slow. Deku saw the rift bloom before him, a maw of impossible colors. He tried to pull back, to alter his trajectory, but he was a comet locked into its path. The gravitational pull of the rift was immense, an unseen hand yanking him forward. DKU. Bakugo's horrified roar was the last thing he heard clearly from his own world. He saw a flash of orange and black as Bakugo, abandoning the thugs, launched himself forward in a desperate, reckless attempt to intercept him, to blast him out of the rift's pull. He saw Uraraka, who had just finished guiding a family behind a barrier, her face a mask of terror as she reached out for him, her quirk useless against this fundamental violation of physics. He saw their faces, the faces of his friends, his family, contorted in fear for him, and then, the world dissolved. There was no sense of movement, only a violent, total deconstruction of self. He felt as if his body had been unraveled into a billion threads of light and pain. Colors he had no name for burned his retinas. Sounds that were not sounds echoed in the core of his being. The feeling of one for all, that constant companion, flickered and sputtered like a dying flame in a hurricane. He was falling up, sideways, and inwards all at once. His scream was lost, stolen by the silent, shrieking void. Just as he thought his consciousness would shred itself into nothingness, the sensory assault stopped. It was replaced by a single, brutal sensation, impact. He slammed onto a hard, gritty surface with a force that knocked the last vestiges of air from his lungs. For a moment, he just lay there, sprawled on his stomach, every inch of his body screaming in protest. His head swam, nausea churning in his gut. The green lightning of full cowling had vanished, leaving behind a deep, resonant exhaustion that felt heavier than any training exercise. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. The ground was black and rough, asphalt. He was in a street. But it wasn't the shattered street of the Kamino reconstruction zone. This one was intact, clean, marked with strange yellow lines. He coughed, the taste of ozone and something else, something metallic and foreign, on his tongue. He looked up, and the world tilted on its axis. The buildings were wrong. They were taller, denser, a forest of brick and glass and steel that clawed at a sky that seemed too pale, too empty. The architecture was alien, a style he'd only seen in pre-Quirk-era films. The cars parked along the street were sleek and unfamiliar, their designs subtly but significantly different. And the noise. The noise was the worst part. Horns blared with a different pitch. Sirens wailed a different song. But above all that, there was the chatter. A low, constant hum of human voices, of people walking past him, and he couldn't understand a single word. It was a babble of sharp consonants, and soft vowels that his brain couldn't parse. It was like listening to a recording played backward. He saw people in strange clothes, holding strange devices to their ears, glance at him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and alarm, before hurrying on their way. A teenager in a torn costume, bruised and disoriented, was apparently not something they were equipped to deal with. Panic, cold and sharp, began to pierce through the fog of his disorientation. Okay. Stay calm. Assess the situation. All Might's voice, a memory of his mentor's training, echoed in his head. First, check your own condition. He did a quick mental scan. His right arm, the one he prepared the smash with, ached with a phantom agony, but it wasn't broken. Bruises, scrapes, a likely concussion, but nothing critical. His costume was torn at the shoulder and knee. His mask was gone. Second, check your gear. He fumbled for the comms unit in his ear. Uraraka-san? Todoroki-kun? Kaken? Can anyone hear me? Only static answered, a dead hiss that felt more final than silence. Third, establish your location. He stumbled to his feet, leaning against a strange red metal post with a sign full of the same incomprehensible letters. He looked around, desperately searching for a landmark, for a hero agency billboard, for anything familiar. There was nothing. No towering gray spire, no familiar skyline, just an endless canyon of foreign buildings under a lonely sky. The people weren't just speaking a different language. They were acting differently. There was no undercurrent of caution, no one scanning the rooftops for heroes on patrol. It was a kind of mundane normalcy that felt deeply, profoundly wrong. In his world, even in times of peace, there was always an awareness of the extraordinary. Here, the extraordinary seemed to have been forgotten. Where am I? He whispered, the words feeling thick and useless in his mouth. Was this Warpgate's quirk? A pocket dimension? A hallucination? The sheer solidity of the world around him argued against the latter. The smell of roasting nuts from a nearby cart, the rumble of a subway train beneath his feet, the cool breeze that carried the scent of rain, it was all too real. He was lost. Utterly and completely lost. The realization hit him not like a punch, but like the slow, creeping chill of deep water. His friends, his teachers, his mother, they were all gone. He was an island in an ocean he didn't know existed. The panic he'd been holding at bay began to bubble up, hot and suffocating. His breathing hitched. His vision started to tunnel. No. You are a hero. You don't panic. He clenched his fists, his fingernails digging into his palms. Think. Analyze. What was the last thing you saw? A rift. Unstable. It pulled you in. It has to have an exit. Maybe it will open again. I just have to wait. I just have to. A scream cut through the city's drone. It was a sound of pure, primal terror, high-pitched and raw. It was followed by another, and then another. People on the street started to run, their faces pale with a fear that was suddenly very familiar to him. Deku's head snapped up. His own fear was instantly shoved aside, replaced by the instinct that had been drilled into him since the first day at UA danger. Civilians in trouble. Act. His eyes scanned the street, searching for the source. And then he saw it. It wasn't a villain. It wasn't a Nomu or a common thug. It was something else. Phasing through the wall of a brownstone building was a creature that defied logic. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but its form was composed of swirling, semi-translucent shadows and sickly purple energy. It had no discernible face, only a maw of shifting darkness that seemed to drink the light around it. It moved with a disjointed, unnatural gait, its smoky tendrils lashing out not to destroy property, but to pass through the panicking civilians. Those it touched didn't get thrown or injured. They simply collapsed, their faces slack, a faint wisp of light leaving their bodies and being absorbed into the creature's form. It was feeding on them. On their life force, their energy, their very spirit. Deku's blood ran cold. He had faced down monsters made of muscle and hate, but this was a different kind of horror. It felt ancient and wrong. One for all thrummed under his skin, a low, wary growl. It was a power meant to fight the physical, the tangible. What could a punch do to a thing made of shadow? As the creature advanced, its dark form solidifying for a moment as it absorbed the energy from another victim, a sound cut through the chaos. It was a sharp, slicing sound, and a circle of brilliant orange sparks materialized in midair. The circle expanded into a shimmering, spinning portal, and from it stepped a man. He was of Asian descent, with a stern, focused face and a stocky, powerful build. He wore robes of layered red and gold, and his hands were already moving, weaving intricate patterns in the air. As he moved, glowing, complex mandalas of orange light formed around his fists. The man didn't shout a hero name, or announce his presence. He simply acted. He thrust his hands forward, and a whip of pure, golden energy lashed out from one of the mandalas, striking the shadow creature. The monster shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and recoiled. The energy whip seemed to be the only thing that could truly affect it, burning its shadowy flesh like a hot brand. Deku stared, mesmerized. What is that? A quirk? It doesn't feel like a quirk. There's no physical tell, no biological mechanism I can see. It's magic. The word popped into his head unbidden. It was the only explanation that fit. The robed man, though powerful, was clearly on the defensive. He was one man against a foe that was growing stronger with every civilian it drained. He created a shield, a larger, plate-like mandala, to block a swipe of shadowy claws, but the force of the blow sent him stumbling back. He was strained, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was holding the line, but the line was about to break. Another family, a mother and two small children, were frozen in fear, trapped between the creature and a parked car. The monster turned its faceless void towards them, sensing fresh prey. Deku didn't think. He didn't analyze. He didn't weigh the odds. He acted. Get away from them! He roared, the words coming out in Japanese, a meaningless shout in this new world. But the intent was universal. He activated full cowling. The familiar green lightning exploded around him, a stark, vibrant contrast to the ethereal orange of the robed man's power. He poured every ounce of his focus into the 45%, the power surging through him, a comforting, familiar fire in the face of this incomprehensible threat. The robed man, Wong, though Deku did not know his name, glanced over his shoulder, his eyes widening in shock at the sight of this green-clad teenager crackling with an unknown energy. Who was this boy? Where had he come from? Deku didn't have a plan. He just had an objective: create a distraction. Save those people. He lowered his stance, channeling one for all into his legs and launching himself forward. He wasn't aiming for the creature's core. He was aiming for its most solid point, a clawed arm that was reaching for the terrified mother. He knew a normal punch might just pass through it. But one for all wasn't a normal punch. It was the culmination of 9 generations of will, of the burning desire to save others. It was more than muscle. It was spirit. He didn't even name the attack. He just kicked. His steel-soled boot, wreathed in emerald lightning, connected with the creature's shadowy limb. For a split second, he felt a strange resistance, like kicking through freezing smoke. And then, there was impact. A solid, definitive impact. The creature shrieked again, a cry of shock and pain this time. The point of contact between Deku's boot and the monster's form sizzled, the green energy of OFA seeming to burn away the purple shadow like acid. The limb didn't just recoil, it destabilized, dissolving into wisps of dark smoke before slowly reforming. It worked. A physical attack had worked. The creature, its attention now ripped from the civilians, whirled to face this new, painful annoyance. But that was all the opening the robed man needed. Now! The man grunted, his hands a blur. He slammed his palms together, and a cage of glowing orange bands erupted from the ground, wrapping around the creature. He twisted his hands, and the bands constricted, pulling the monster into a compressed ball of shrieking shadow. With a final, mighty heave and a guttural chant of words that made the air hum, he thrust his hands towards the sky. A rift, similar to the one he'd arrived through, tore open above them. He shoved the captured entity through it, and the portal snapped shut with the sound of a thunderclap. Silence descended upon the street, broken only by the distant, receding sirens and the soft whimpering of the rescued family. The sky returned to its pale, normal color. The remaining civilians, who had been watching from a safe distance, slowly began to lower their phones. Deku stood panting, the lightning from full cowling flickering out as he released the power. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the bone-deep ache and the crushing weight of his situation. He had survived. He had helped. But he was still lost. The robed man turned to him. His face was a mask of stern suspicion and deep weariness. He had a wound on his forehead, a thin trickle of blood making its way down his temple. He looked Deku up and down, taking in the tattered green costume, the wild green hair, and the lingering aura of strange power. The man spoke, his voice a low, commanding baritone. The words were in that same foreign language, sharp and questioning. Deku just stared back, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and confusion. He shook his head slightly, trying to convey his lack of understanding. I don't. He started in Japanese, his voice hoarse. The robed man's eyes narrowed. He took a step closer, his gaze intense. He raised a hand, not in a threatening way, but in a gesture of concentration. He muttered a single, strange word under his breath. For a fleeting moment, a faint golden light shimmered around Deku's head. It felt like a cool breeze washing through his mind. Then the man spoke again. "Who are you?" And this time, with a jolt that sent a fresh wave of dizziness through him, Deku understood him perfectly. The words were still foreign, yet his brain translated them instantly, seamlessly. The man hadn't switched to Japanese. The magic had built a bridge. How did you do that?" Deku stammered, his mind reeling from this new impossibility piled atop all the others. "I am asking the questions," the man said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He gestured towards the grand, ornate building the creature had been phasing through. It had a strange, circular window on its top floor, designed like a cross within a series of rings. "Your power, it is not of this world. You will come with me." Now, Deku hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him not to trust this strange, powerful man. But what other choice did he have? He was alone, in a world he didn't understand, a world with monsters made of shadow and men who could weave light with their hands. This man, whoever he was, had answers. And right now, answers were the only thing more valuable than a way home. He gave a slow, weary nod. The man grunted in acknowledgement. He turned and walked towards the large wooden doors of the building. He didn't use a key. He simply raised a hand, and the heavy bolts slid back with a resounding thud. He pushed the door open and beckoned Deku inside with a jerk of his head. Deku took a deep breath, steeling himself, and stepped across the threshold. The door swung shut behind him, the sound echoing with a heavy finality. The noise of the city was instantly cut off, replaced by a profound, cathedral-like silence. He was standing in a massive foyer, the scale of which seemed impossible from the outside. A grand staircase swept upwards, and every surface was covered in artifacts that made his skin crawl with a low-level hum of energy. Glass cases held floating crystals, ancient books bound in unknown leather, and metallic objects that twisted in non-Euclidean shapes. "This is the New York Sanctum Sanctorum," the man said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. He finally introduced himself, though it was more of a statement of fact than a friendly greeting. "I am Wang. I am the guardian of this place. Sanctum. Sanctorum?" Deku repeated, the words feeling alien on his tongue. "Guardian? What is this place? What was that creature?" Wang's expression was grim. "This sanctum is one of 3 great houses of magic on this planet. We are the shield that protects this reality from mystical threats. Threats like the one you just encountered, a nether wraith, drawn to the life force of mortals. Magic. Reality. Mystical threats." Deku's head spun. It was all too much. He felt like one of his notebooks, its pages ripped out and scattered by the wind. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "My world, it has quirks. Powers. But nothing like this. I was fighting a villain, and his quirk, it made a hole." Wang held up a hand, silencing him. "Quirks? We have no such things in this dimension. You are an anomaly, boy. A ripple in the fabric of what should be. Your energy signature is chaotic, powerful, but undisciplined." It hurt the wraith. Something only consecrated magical energy, or an object of immense willpower should be able to do. He eyed Deku with a new, more calculating look. "What is clear is that you are not from here." The confirmation, spoken so plainly, hit Deku with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't a pocket dimension. He had been thrown across realities. "Then, can you send me back?" The question was desperate, a plea. "My friends, they saw me get pulled in. They'll be worried. I have to get back." Wang's stern facade finally cracked, replaced by a deep, profound weariness. He turned away from Deku, his gaze sweeping over the silent, watchful artifacts of the sanctum. The air in the room suddenly felt heavier, colder. Sending someone back across dimensional planes, especially through an uncontrolled tear like the one you describe, is a feat of immense power and precision, Wang said, his voice low. "It requires a deep understanding of the multiverse, an understanding possessed by only one man." He turned back to Deku, and for the first time, the boy saw not just suspicion in the sorcerer's eyes, but something that looked like grief. There is only one person with the skill and authority to even attempt such a thing. The master of this sanctum. The keeper of the Eye of Agamotto. A sliver of hope, fragile but fierce, ignited in Deku's chest. Then I need to speak to him. Please! He can help me. Wong's face hardened into a mask of stone. He delivered the final, devastating blow, the words falling like weights onto Deku's already burdened shoulders. You cannot. Because the master of this sanctum, the protector of this world, the Sorcerer Supreme. Dr. Stephen Strange. He paused, the silence stretching, filled with the weight of unspoken catastrophe, has vanished. The final word of Wong's declaration, vanished, did not echo in the cavernous foyer. It was swallowed by the profound, oppressive silence of the sanctum. It was a silence that felt heavier than any sound, a vacuum where a formidable presence should have been. For Izuku Midoriya, it was the sound of his last, fragile hope being extinguished. He stared at the stern-faced sorcerer, his mind refusing to process the information. It was like trying to solve an impossible equation. He had been thrown into a new world, a new dimension, a concept that his science and quirk-based education had never prepared him for. He was alone, injured, and incomprehensibly lost. And the one person, the one single point of potential salvation in this entire terrifying reality, was gone. Vanished? Deku repeated, the word a hollow croak. What does that mean? Like he went on a trip? Or is he? He couldn't bring himself to finish the thought. Wong's expression was grim, etched with lines of sleeplessness and a grief he clearly had no time to indulge. It means one moment he was here, meditating in the Chamber of Echoes, and the next, he was not. There was no sign of struggle. No residual energy from an attack. No farewell note left on the astral plane. He is simply gone. As if he were a line of text erased from the book of reality. The description sent a chill down Deku's spine that had nothing to do with the cool air of the sanctum. He thought of Warpgate's horrifying portals, tearing reality open. Was this world as fragile as his own? But without him, who's in charge? Deku asked, his voice small. Who's protecting this place? This world? Wong's gaze hardened, his personal grief buried under a mountain of duty. I am, he said, the two words carrying the weight of the world. I am the master of the New York Sanctum and acting guardian of this realm until the Sorcerer Supreme returns. A duty made infinitely more difficult by the cosmic debris that has begun to wash up on our shores. He gave Deku a pointed look, leaving no doubt as to what, or who, he considered debris. The accusation, though unspoken, stung. Deku felt a flush of indignant frustration. I didn't ask to be here. I was fighting to protect people, just like you were. There was a villain, his quirk, it's like a superpower, a special ability people in my world are born with. It went out of control. He began to pace, his agitation growing. He needed to make this man understand. If he could just explain it logically, analytically, maybe there was another way. My world is full of them. Quirks. About 80% of the population has one. We have a whole society built around it, with pro-heroes licensed by the government to fight villains. I'm a student at the top heroes school in Japan, UA High School. My quirk is called One for All. It's a power passed down from one person to the next, a stockpile of immense physical strength. The villain I was fighting, Warpgate, could create unstable rifts. I tried to stop him, but he opened one right on top of me. That's how I got here. He gestured wildly, his hands tracing the story in the air, the way he always did when his mind was racing faster than his mouth. Wong listened with the stoic patience of a man listening to a child describe a particularly vivid dream. His expression remained unchanged, a stony mask of skepticism. Quirks. Pro-heroes. A one for all, Wong repeated, the terms sounding like utter nonsense on his tongue. He let out a weary sigh. Boy, I do not have the time to decipher the delusions of a dimensionally displaced adolescent. Every reality has its own set of natural laws. In yours, perhaps people are born with the ability to explode or to float. In this one, they are not. Here, power of that magnitude comes from one of three sources: the cosmic energy we draw from other dimensions to cast spells, the inherent power of mystical artifacts, or pacts made with entities far older and more dangerous than any villain you have ever faced. He took a step closer, his eyes boring into Deku's. Your power feels like none of those. It feels raw, biological, and utterly chaotic. You are an anomaly. A paradox. And a problem I do not have time for. Suddenly, a deep, sonorous chime echoed through the sanctum. It wasn't like a bell or an alarm clock. It was a sound that vibrated in Deku's bones, a single, resonant note that spoke of immense antiquity. Wong's head snapped towards a large, ornate map of the world that dominated one wall. It was not a map of nations, but of glowing lines of energy. A single point over the South Pacific was now flashing with a faint, pulsing red rune. The wards are fraying, Wong muttered, more to himself than to Deku. He strode towards a large, levitating astrolabe in the center of the room and began to manipulate its rings, his hands weaving complex patterns that left faint trails of orange light. The sanctum's defenses are tied directly to the Sorcerer Supreme. Without his presence anchoring them, they weaken with every passing hour. Minor incursions that would have been repelled automatically are now beginning to slip through. He chanted a few words in a language that made the air hum, and the red rune on the map fizzled and died. Wong did not look relieved, only more tired. Stay here, he commanded, pointing a stern finger at Deku. Touch nothing. Every object in this room is more dangerous than you can possibly imagine. With that, he turned and marched up the grand staircase, his footsteps echoing, leaving Deku alone in the silent heart of the impossible. Deku stood frozen for a long moment, the command pinning him in place. Touch nothing. The irony was crushing. He was surrounded by a level of power that dwarfed anything he had ever known, and he was as helpless as he had been on the day he was diagnosed quirkless. The feeling was so sickeningly familiar, it made his stomach churn. The awe, the wonder, the desperate, burning desire to understand and to be a part of it, and the cold, hard wall of his own inadequacy. He looked around the foyer, truly seeing it for the first time. It wasn't just a collection of strange objects, it was a library of forgotten power. A suit of samurai armor stood in one corner, humming with a palpable sense of menace. A glass case contained a desiccated, clawed hand on a velvet cushion. Books with titles and shifting, unreadable scripts were chained to their shelves. This wasn't a museum. It was an armory. A prison. A bastion against the darkness. And he was a trespasser. He sank onto the bottom step of the grand staircase, burying his face in his hands. The adrenaline from the fight had completely faded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion and a tidal wave of despair. Kaken. Uraraka-san. He saw their faces in his mind's eye, twisted in horror, as he vanished. Were they okay? Did they defeat Warpgate? Were they looking for him? Of course they were. All Might would be looking for him. Aizawa-sensei. His mother. A sob caught in his throat. The thought of his mother, of the panic and fear she must be feeling, was a physical pain in his chest. He had to get back. He had to. But how? The only person who could help was gone. He was trapped. The word echoed in the lonely chambers of his heart. Trapped. His muttering started, a subconscious habit he could never quite break. Okay, think. What are the variables? 1. I am in a different dimension. 2. This dimension is protected by magic, not quirks. 3. The protector, Dr. Strange, is missing. 4. The new guardian, Wong, sees me as a liability. 5. The defenses of this world are weakening. He paused, taking a shaky breath. Conclusion. I am in a dangerous place at a dangerous time, and I am completely useless. He felt the phantom thrum of One for All under his skin, a silent giant waiting for a command he didn't know how to give in this new context. What good was a Detroit smash against a monster made of shadow, or a fraying magical ward? It was like trying to punch a hurricane. Another chime, deeper and more urgent this time, reverberated through the sanctum. On the wall map, 3 more runes began to flash, 2 in Europe and 1 over the Himalayas. Deku watched as Wong reappeared on the upper landing, moving with grim purpose towards a different chamber. He didn't even glance down at Deku. He was a doctor in a hospital with too many patients, triaging disasters that Deku couldn't even see. The feeling of uselessness was a lead weight in his gut. He was Deku, the hero who always charged in, who always found a way to help. But here, charging in would be suicide. He clenched his fists. He had to do something. He couldn't just sit here and wait for this world to crumble around him, taking his only chance of getting home with it. He pushed himself to his feet. He wouldn't touch anything. But he could observe. He could analyze. That was his first and truest power, the one he was born with. He pulled the charred, half-burnt remains of his analysis notebook from a pouch on his belt. The cover was scorched, but some pages were still intact. He flipped to a clean one. Hero Analysis for a Magical World, Volume 1, he thought, a flicker of his old self returning. He began to walk slowly, cautiously, around the foyer, his eyes scanning everything. He didn't get close enough to touch, but he catalogued. Item 1, the levitating astrolabe. He sketched it quickly. Seems to be a diagnostic tool. Wong used it to address the first alarm. Interacts with the world map. Is it a focusing lens for his power, or does it operate on its own? Requires specific hand gestures and verbal components. The language is key. Is it a dead language, or one specific to magic? Item 2, the armor. He sketched the samurai armor. Radiates a distinct feeling. Not heat, not cold. A sort of intent. Aggression. It's not just a suit of metal, it feels occupied. A vessel for a spirit, or enchanted to act on its own? Defense mechanism? Must avoid. He continued like this for what felt like an hour, his frantic sketching and muttering the only sounds in the great hall. It was a coping mechanism, a way to impose order on a situation that was pure chaos. He was turning his fear into data. It was during his observation of a particularly nasty-looking book bound in what looked like reptile skin that a third alarm sounded. This one was different. It wasn't a chime. It was a low, guttural grinding sound, like stone grating on stone, and it came from a hallway just off the main foyer. A heavy, rune-etched door at the end of the hall was vibrating, a dark purple light seeping from beneath it. Wong appeared on the staircase, moving faster than Deku had seen him move yet. His face was pale. The vault of shadows, he swore under his breath. The seal is weakening. Of all the cursed times, he sprinted down the stairs, barely sparing Deku a glance. I told you to stay put. He snapped as he ran past. I didn't touch anything. Deku protested, but Wong was already at the vibrating door, his hands glowing with brilliant orange energy as he began tracing complex patterns over the stone, trying to reinforce the failing seal. The ambient mystical radiation in this dimension is in flux, Wong grunted, sweat beading on his brow. Strange's absence is like a drop in barometric pressure. It's causing every contained storm to rage against its vessel. Despite Wong's order, Deku found himself creeping closer. He couldn't help it. The hero in him, the part that needed to understand the threat, was overriding the part that was terrified. He stayed at the entrance to the hallway, watching. The purple light under the door intensified, and the grinding sound grew louder. The runes Wong was painting onto the door sizzled and vanished as quickly as he could create them. The dark magic from within was actively fighting back, eating his spells. It's not working, Wong growled in frustration. His own fatigue was making his spells less stable. He was trying to be a dam against a flood, and he was cracking. With a final, sickening crack, the stone door blew inward, not off its hinges, but simply dissolving into dust. It revealed a small, dark chamber, empty except for a single pedestal in the center, and on that pedestal was a chalice. It was a simple thing, carved from some kind of polished, obsidian-like stone. But it was the source of the oppressive purple light, which now pulsed from it in waves, casting distorted shadows across the room. The chalice of whispers, Wong breathed, his expression one of dread. An artifact from the dark dimension, filled with an insatiable hunger. As he spoke, a tendril of pure shadow, darker than the room around it, slithered from the lip of the chalice. It snaked through the air, testing its freedom. It wasn't fast, but it moved with a chilling purpose. Wong immediately threw up a shield, a large mandala of orange light, and stepped forward to confront it. Go, boy! Get out of here! This is beyond you. But Deku was frozen, his eyes wide with a horrified fascination. He saw the shadow tendril lash out, not at Wang, but at a decorative suit of armor near the doorway. The moment the shadow touched the metal, the armor didn't dent or break. It seemed to sigh. The faint shimmer of enchantment that had clung to it vanished, and it clattered to the floor, dull and lifeless. The chalice pulsed with satisfaction, its purple glow brightening slightly. It was feeding on magic itself. Wang began his counterattack, launching bolts of golden energy at the chalice. They struck the pedestal, blasting chunks of stone away, but the chalice itself seemed immune, protected by a shimmering barrier of its own dark energy. The shadow tendril whipped around, moving faster now, more aggressively. It lunged at Wang. He blocked it with his shield, but the impact sent a tremor up his arm. The shadow clung to his magical barrier, and Deku could see it, like a leech, trying to drain the power from the spell. Wang grunted, pouring more of his own energy into the shield to keep it stable. He was in a stalemate. If he dropped the shield to attack, the tendril would strike him. If he maintained the shield, he couldn't get a clear shot at the chalice to banish it. He was pinned. And that's when Deku's brain, his analytical, tactical brain, finally kicked in, overriding his fear. He's trapped. The artifact is feeding on his magic. Physical attacks are useless. One for all is useless here. He needs a distraction. He needs an opening. He looked around frantically. What could he do? Throw something? No, it would just be consumed. Yell? Pointless. He saw Wang's face, strained and pale in the pulsating light. He saw the sheer, soul-crushing exhaustion in the man's eyes. This man was carrying the weight of an entire world on his shoulders. He was grieving his friend, fighting off cosmic horrors, and dealing with a dimension-hopping teenager all at once. And he was about to fall. If he fell, this whole place fell. And if this place fell, Deku's last chance of ever seeing his own world again would fall with it. The shadow tendril pulsed, gathering its strength for another, stronger assault. It was going to shatter Wang's shield. Deku could see it. In that split second, 100 plans flashed through his mind, all of them useless. There was no clever solution. There was no secret weakness he could exploit. There was only one thing he could do. One thing he was good at. The chalice of whispers didn't want flesh. It wanted energy. It wanted a soul. Wang was a beacon of magical power, a feast. Deku, on the other hand, had no magic. He was, to the chalice, probably nothing, but he was standing between the artifact and its meal. He was an obstacle. And he could be a better one. It was the sludge villain all over again. A powerful defender was trapped. A helpless victim was in danger. And his legs just started moving. He didn't activate one for all. He knew, instinctively, that it would be like pouring gasoline on a fire, giving the chalice an even greater source of energy to consume. This act had to be quirkless. It had to be just him. Wang! He screamed. The sorcerer's head snapped towards him, his eyes wide with alarm. No! Stay back! But Deku was already in motion. He sprinted into the vault, his worn-out boots slapping against the ancient stone. He didn't run towards the chalice. He ran towards Wang. The shadow tendril, sensing a new variable, a new source of life, however faint, momentarily diverted its attention. It lunged not at Wang, but at the space between them. Deku reached Wang in 2 long strides. He didn't have a plan beyond this. He just acted. With all his strength, he shoved the sorcerer, a solid, desperate push to the side. It needs an opening, he yelled. Wang, caught off balance and exhausted, stumbled back, his shield flickering as his concentration broke. And Deku was left standing alone, directly in the path of the soul-eating shadow. He saw it coming, a ribbon of absolute nothingness. He had no shield. He had no power that could stop it. He had a brief, crystal-clear moment of certainty. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in a blaze of glory fighting all for one, but in a dusty room in another universe, consumed by a thing he didn't understand. A strange peace settled over him. He thought of his mom, of All Might's smiling face, of the determined glare of Kakin and the kind eyes of Uraraka. He was sorry. But he didn't regret it. A hero saves people. That was the first and last rule. He closed his eyes and braced for the end. But the end did not come. Instead, he felt a sudden, powerful gust of wind from behind him. It was accompanied by the sound of tearing fabric and a powerful whoosh that was more like the cry of a hunting falcon than any inanimate object. Something heavy and alive slammed into his back and wrapped around him. It felt like a pair of strong, insistent arms. He was yanked backwards with incredible force, his feet leaving the ground, his body pulled away from the path of the shadow tendril, which struck the empty air where he had been standing a nanosecond before. He landed in a heap a dozen feet away, tangled in something soft and red. He looked up, bewildered, to see what had saved him. It was a cloak. A high-collared, crimson cloak. It had been on a mannequin in the main foyer, and now it was here, one corner of it still wrapped protectively around his shoulder, the rest of it hovering in the air behind him as if it had a will of its own. It seemed to be studying him, its collar twitching like the head of an inquisitive animal. The cloak of levitation had acted. But that wasn't all. A brilliant, emerald-green light suddenly flooded the vault, eclipsing the sickly purple of the chalice. It was a light that felt ancient, pure, and overwhelmingly powerful. The chalice of whispers shrieked, a psychic scream of pain and fear, and its shadow tendril recoiled as if burned. Deku and the still stunned Wang looked towards the source of the light. It was coming from the grand foyer. From the main pedestal where a strange, ornate amulet rested. The Eye of Agamotto. It was no longer a dormant piece of metal and stone. The intricate golden casing had opened like the petals of a flower, revealing a glowing green stone at its center. The stone was the source of the light, a miniature star of pure, focused energy. Its gaze was fixed, not on the chalice, but on him. On Izuku Midoriya. It was a gaze that seemed to pierce through his skin, through his flesh, through his very soul. It wasn't judging him. It was reading him. It was seeing everything, his quirkless past, the gift of one for all, his terror, his resolve, his bone-deep, unshakable, often reckless need to save others at any cost to himself. It saw the boy who ran towards the sludge villain. It saw the boy who shattered his own bones to save his friend. It saw the boy who had just thrown himself in front of a soul eater to save a man he'd known for less than a day. It saw a hero. The chalice, cowering before the sacred light of the time stone, was now completely vulnerable. Wang, shaking himself from his stupor, saw his chance. His hands a blur, he wove a complex binding spell, a cage of golden energy that snapped around the artifact. With a final, roaring incantation, he banished it, sending it back to whatever dark corner of reality it had crawled from. The purple light vanished. The vault was plunged into near darkness, illuminated only by the soft, steady, emerald glow of the Eye of Agamotto, which now slowly dimmed, its outer casing closing. Its statement made, silence returned. Wang slowly got to his feet, his body aching. He ignored the lingering scent of ozone and dark magic. He didn't even look at the empty pedestal where the chalice had been. He stared, his face a mask of utter, profound disbelief, at the scene before him. He saw the boy from another world, sitting on the floor, tangled in the most temperamental relic in the sanctum. The cloak of levitation, which had bucked and thrown even seasoned sorcerers, was now nudging the boy's cheek with its collar like a contented cat. And he saw the Eye of Agamotto, dormant for weeks since strange disappearance, now pulsing with a soft, living light, its focus entirely on the boy. Wang understood. The truth hit him with the force of a physical blow, shaking the very foundations of his ordered, traditional world. The relics of the Sorcerer Supreme were not mere tools. They were symbiotic, sentient to a degree. And they had a will of their own. The cloak chose a master not based on power, but on courage and character. The eye, the vessel for an infinity stone, resonated only with one who possessed an indomitable will and the potential to bear its cosmic burden. The relics did not choose a sorcerer. They chose a spirit. In Deku's selfless, reckless, insane act of sacrifice, they hadn't seen a quirk. They hadn't seen a dimension-hopping anomaly. They had seen the defining, essential quality of a sorcerer supreme, the willingness to pay any price to protect others. Wang walked slowly over to Deku, his footsteps heavy on the stone floor. The cloak rustled, pulling back slightly as if to shield the boy, but Deku waved a hand, and it settled down, hovering at his shoulder. Deku looked up at Wang, his eyes wide and confused. What What just happened? Wang looked from the boy to the cloak, then towards the faint green glow from the foyer. He let out a long, heavy breath, the air leaving his lungs as if he were releasing a burden he had carried for weeks. The skepticism, the hostility, the frustration, it all melted away, replaced by a stunned, solemn, and deeply reluctant acceptance. The sanctum, Wang said, his voice quiet, awed. The sanctum has made its choice. He knelt, not in supplication, but to be on the boy's level, to look him in the eye. In the absence of the Sorcerer Supreme, the relics that guard this realm lie dormant, waiting for a worthy successor. They do not judge by skill, or knowledge, or power. They judge the heart, the will, the spirit. He placed a heavy hand on Deku's shoulder. The boy flinched but didn't pull away. The cloak of levitation has chosen you. The eye of Agamotto has acknowledged you. Wang stood up, the weight of his next words seeming to age him a decade. He looked at this bruised, confused, and possibly young boy from another reality, now draped in the mantle of their world's greatest protector. It was against all logic, all tradition, all reason, but it had happened. By ancient law and by the will of the relics themselves, Wang declared, his voice resonating with a terrible, unshakable finality. Until Doctor Strange returns, the responsibility to protect this world falls to you. He paused, letting the impossible statement hang in the air. Izuku Midoriya, you are now the acting master of this sanctum. You are the Sorcerer Supreme. Deku just stared, his mind a total blank. The words washed over him, meaningless sounds. Sorcerer Supreme? Master of the sanctum? Him? The quirkless, useless Deku who still broke his bones and cried too easily. And then, the meaning crashed down upon him. It wasn't a title. It was a sentence. A burden of impossible, cosmic scale, placed upon the shoulders of a boy who was just trying to find his way home. The weight of it was so immense, so terrifying, it made the power of one for all feel like a single grain of sand on an infinite shore. He wasn't just lost anymore. He was responsible. Sleep had not come. Izuku Midoriya had spent the night in a guest room that was older than his entire country, on a bed with 4 posts carved into the shapes of silent, watchful owls. He had lain awake, staring at a ceiling painted with constellations that did not exist in his sky, every muscle in his body thrumming with a nervous energy that had nowhere to go. The title, Sorcerer Supreme, was a phantom that haunted the corners of the room. It was a joke. A mistake. A cosmic clerical error of catastrophic proportions. He felt like an actor pushed onto a stage in the middle of a play he never read, wearing a costume that didn't fit, with the entire world as his audience. The cloak of levitation had detached itself from him after Wang's pronouncement, but it hadn't returned to its mannequin. Instead, it had floated to his borrowed room and settled on a high-backed armchair, where it now sat, folded in on itself, resembling a brooding, crimson gargoyle. It seemed to be watching him. Waiting. He finally rose when the first pale light of a New York dawn filtered through the sanctum's iconic circular window, casting a lattice of shadows on the polished floor. The building was silent, but it was a living silence, the hum of 1,000 sleeping artifacts a constant, low thrum beneath the floorboards. He was dressed in simple, gray cotton pants and a loose tunic Wang had provided, the clothes of an acolyte. They felt strange and foreign, a constant reminder that his own hero costume, his very identity, was worlds away. He found Wang in what appeared to be a kitchen, a strangely modern and functional room tucked away in a corner of the ancient house. The sorcerer was sipping a cup of steaming tea, a large, leather-bound tome open on the table before him. He looked as if he hadn't slept either. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, but his posture was as rigid and disciplined as ever. He didn't look up when Deku entered. You are awake. It was a statement, not a question. Good. The incursions have slowed. The sanctum has stabilized for now. It seems your appointment has placated the inherent energies of this place. Deku shifted his weight, feeling like a first-year student in the principal's office. Wang-san, about last night. I think there's been a huge mistake. The relics, the cloak, the eye, they must be broken or confused. I can't be what you said I am. I don't have any magic. I have a quirk. It's a physical power. That's all. Wang finally looked up from his book, his gaze flat and unimpressed. He took a slow sip of his tea before speaking. The relics are not broken. They are, perhaps, the only things in this universe that cannot be. They do not choose based on what a person can do. They choose based on what a person is. They chose your spirit, Izuka Midoriya, your capacity for self-sacrifice. The rest, he said, closing the book with a definitive thud, is merely a matter of training. He stood, his presence filling the small kitchen. Your education begins now. The world will not wait for you to feel worthy. He led Deku not out of the sanctum, but deeper into it, down a corridor that seemed to stretch impossibly long. They arrived at a simple wooden door. Wong placed his palm on it, and the wood dissolved into shimmering golden light, revealing a vast, empty space beyond. The room, if it could be called that, was a void. The floor was a smooth, featureless expanse of gray stone that extended into an infinite, starless darkness. It was utterly silent, a place outside of place. This is the chamber of praxis, Wang explained, stepping into the void. A pocket dimension within the sanctum, insulated from the outside world. Here, your failures will not risk leveling a city block. He turned to face Deku, his expression all business. We will begin with the most fundamental principle of thaumaturgy. The Eldritch Shield. It is the first spell every acolyte learns. It is defense. It is focus. It is a manifestation of your will to protect. Wong's hands began to move, a slow, deliberate dance in the empty air. Magic is not a force you command. It is a current you guide. You are the conduit. Your mind provides the shape, your spirit provides the intent, and the energy of the multiverse provides the power. As he spoke, a faint orange line of light appeared in the air, tracing the path of his fingers. It split and weaved, forming a complex, beautiful pattern of interlocking geometric shapes. With a final, graceful motion, he brought his hands together, and the pattern solidified into a spinning, three-dimensional disk of golden energy. It hovered over his forearm, emitting a soft hum and a gentle warmth. It was intricate, perfect, and alive. Observe, Wang said. He held the shield steady, a bastion of pure, ordered energy. Then, with a thought, he let it dissolve back into harmless sparks. The gesture focuses the mind. The incantation, which for now will be silent, centers the will. Now you, Deku swallowed hard. He felt a familiar knot of performance anxiety tighten in his stomach. This was it. His first lesson. He couldn't fail. He wouldn't fail. He was the chosen one, right? He had one for all. He could do this. He took a deep breath and tried to replicate Wang's movements exactly. His analytical mind had recorded every nuance of the sorcerer's gesture. His own hands, accustomed to the precise control needed for full cowling, felt steady. He moved them through the air, tracing the same pattern, but nothing happened. Not a spark. Not a wisp of smoke. His hands just carved empty shapes in the void. He felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. Again, Wang said, his voice devoid of emotion. Deku tried again, focusing harder. He pictured the shield in his mind, just as Wang had instructed. He tried to pour his intent into the motion. I want to protect. I want to defend. This time, a few pitiful orange sparks sputtered from his fingertips and died instantly, like damp firecrackers. It was pathetic. Wang sighed, a sound of immense patience being tested. Your focus is scattered. Your mind is a tempest of anxieties. You are thinking about the result, not the process. Clear your mind. You are not trying to create a shield. You are creating a shield. Deku's frustration began to mount. Clear his mind? His mind was never clear. It was a constant, churning hurricane of analysis, strategy, fear, and doubt. It was the muttering monologue that had defined his entire life. How could he just turn it off? He tried a third time, and a fourth. The results were the same, a few dying sparks, a brief flicker of light, then nothing. The familiar, sickening feeling of powerlessness began to creep in, the ghost of his quirkless past whispering in his ear. Useless. Can't do it. You don't have what it takes. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. No. He wasn't that person anymore. He had power now. A ridiculous amount of it. Maybe that was the problem. Wang had said the multiverse provided the power, but what if he could provide his own? It was the logic of a fighter, not a scholar. If a 5% punch doesn't work, you use an 8% punch. If your base strength isn't enough, you tap into the well. One for All wasn't just physical strength. All Might had always said it was a torch, a beacon of spiritual power passed down through generations. It was a part of his spirit now. Why shouldn't he be able to use it? A new, determined light entered his eyes. Okay, he muttered to himself. New approach. What are you muttering about? Wang asked, his eyebrow raised. I just need more energy, Deku said, more to himself than to Wang. He closed his eyes and took a deep, centering breath, just as he did before a fight. He reached for the power coiled within him. Full cowling, 20%. The transformation was instantaneous and dramatic. Emerald lightning exploded around his body, crackling and hissing in the silent void of the chamber of praxis. The borrowed gray tunic whipped around him as if caught in a gale. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to vibrate with the raw, untamed energy he was now exuding. Wang took an involuntary step back, his eyes widening in alarm. He had seen the boy use this power on the street, but up close, in this controlled environment, he could feel its true nature. It was chaotic, violent, and utterly antithetical to the ordered discipline of sorcery. It was like bringing a lit stick of dynamite into a watchmaker's shop. Boy, what are you doing? Wang warned, his voice sharp. Stop this. That is not the way. But Deku wasn't listening. He could feel the familiar, exhilarating rush of One for All coursing through his veins. This felt right. This felt like him. The feeling of powerlessness vanished, replaced by a surge of confidence. He had the energy now. He just needed to channel it. He raised his hands again, the green lightning arcing between his fingers. He began to trace the pattern of the Eldritch Shield, but this time, he wasn't just guiding an external current. He was actively trying to force the immense, internal power of One for All into the shape of the spell. It was the worst possible thing he could have done. The moment he tried to force the raw, physical energy of his quirk into the delicate, metaphysical matrix of the spell, the two systems clashed with catastrophic violence. The air ripped apart with a sound that was not quite an explosion and not quite a scream, but a horrifying fusion of both. The nascent orange lines of the spell were instantly overwhelmed, shattering into 1,000 fragments. The emerald lightning of One for All, with nowhere to go and no physical target to hit, raged against the magical framework. The result was a violent, uncontrolled detonation of conflicting energies. A blinding flash of green and orange light erupted from Deku's hands, throwing him backward off his feet. He cried out, a sharp yelp of pain, as a searing agony shot up his right arm. It wasn't the dull ache of overusing his quirk. It was a sharp, burning, electrical pain, as if his very nerves were on fire. He landed hard on the stone floor several feet away, his full cowling sputtering out, leaving him gasping and trembling. The chamber of praxis was once again silent and dark, but the air stank of burned ozone and something else, something metallic and wrong, like a melted circuit board. A large, black scorch mark marred the pristine gray floor where he had been standing. Wang rushed to his side, his face a mixture of anger and concern. Are you a fool? I told you to guide, not to command. You could have torn your arm from its socket. Deku cradled his right hand to his chest, his whole arm shaking uncontrollably. He looked down at his fingers. They weren't broken, not like the old days, but they felt wrong. A deep, resonant pain pulsed in the joints, and the skin was red and tender, as if he'd plunged his hand into boiling water. He tried to make a fist, and a fresh wave of agony made him gasp. He stared at his trembling hand, and the fragile confidence he'd built shattered into a million pieces. He had used his ultimate power, the gift from All Might, the legacy of 8 heroes, and all it had done was hurt him and fail spectacularly. The despair that crashed down on him was heavier and colder than anything he had felt the night before. This wasn't just a failure. This was a fundamental rejection. The universe itself was telling him he didn't belong here, that his power was a contamination, a poison to the very fabric of this new reality. Wang saw the look on his face, the utter desolation in his eyes, and his anger softened slightly into a weary frustration. Get up, he said, his voice firm but no longer harsh. "We will try again." And so they did. For hours, the passing of time was meaningless in the void, but Deku felt it in the growing ache in his bones and the raw, scraped feeling in his soul. He tried everything his analytical mind could devise. He tried using less one for all, just 1%. The result was a smaller, but still painful, backlash that fizzled out instantly. He tried activating it only at the very last moment of the gesture. A painful spark shocked his fingertips. He tried holding the gesture, and then pulsing the power. The air just popped, like a static shock. He abandoned his quirk entirely and went back to basics, trying to use only his will, his intent. But his will was now contaminated by the memory of his failure. His mind was a battlefield of self-recrimination. Every time he tried to focus, the ghost of the green and orange explosion would flash behind his eyes. The pathetic sparks he managed to create seemed to mock him. He grew more and more frantic. His movements, once precise, became sloppy. His muttering, a constant stream of self-criticism, filled the silent chamber. "No, that's wrong, the angle of the wrist was off. Wang San's was smoother. Maybe if I focus on the feeling of the energy instead of the shape. But what does it feel like? It feels like nothing, because I have nothing. I'm empty, just trying to force it, but I can't force it, so I have to guide it. But how do you guide something you can't even feel?" Wang stood by, watching, his arms crossed. He offered no more instruction, no words of encouragement or criticism. He simply observed, his expression unreadable. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of fruitless, painful effort, Deku stumbled and fell to his knees. He didn't have the strength to get up. His right hand throbbed with a dull, persistent fire. His body was exhausted. His spirit was broken. He stared at his useless hands, the hands that had once shattered glaciers and felled giants, now unable to conjure more than a few pitiful sparks. And the wall he had built around the most vulnerable part of himself, the part he thought he had left behind in middle school, crumbled into dust. A single, hot tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. Then another. Soon, his shaking shoulders gave way to quiet, racking sobs. He hunched over, his forehead pressed against the cold stone floor, the sound of his own heartbroken cries the only noise in the infinite void. The quirkless, useless Deku he had tried so hard to outrun had finally caught up to him. "I can't," he choked out, the words torn from his throat. "I can't do it." He looked up at Wang, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a despair so profound it was painful to look at. The carefully constructed persona of the heroic successor, of the determined shonen hero, was gone. All that was left was a scared, lost, and broken-hearted boy. "The relics, they made a mistake," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm a fraud. I've always been a fraud." The confession, once spoken, came pouring out of him like a torrent, a flood of all the insecurities he had kept locked away for years. "I wasn't born with my power, you know. I was quirkless. A reject. For 14 years, I was just a useless kid who dreamed of being a hero but couldn't do anything. Everyone told me to give up. Then, I got lucky. I was given this power. I didn't earn it. And I've spent every single day since then trying to prove I'm worthy of it, breaking my bones, tearing myself apart, just to catch up to everyone else, just to pretend I belong." He gestured wildly at himself, at the pathetic gray tunic, at the vast emptiness around them. "And now this. The universe literally picks me to be its greatest champion, and I can't even light a candle. Don't you see? It's the same story all over again. I'm just a quirkless kid who got lucky, and now I've stumbled into a world where my luck has run out. My power is useless here. I am useless here. I'm not a sorcerer. I'm not a hero. I'm just nothing." His voice trailed off into another sob. He had finally said it. He had given voice to the deepest, darkest fear of his heart, that without one for all, he was nothing, and that even with it, he was just an imposter. Wang remained silent for a long moment, his stony expression finally cracking. He had seen acolytes fail. He had seen them weep with frustration, but he had never seen a soul so thoroughly crushed under the weight of its own perceived inadequacy. He had seen a powerful boy from another world. Now, for the first time, He was seeing the spirit the relics had chosen, a spirit defined not by its power, but by its immense, heartbreaking vulnerability and its desperate, burning desire to be worthy. He walked over and sat on the floor, cross-legged, in front of the weeping boy. It was a gesture of such unexpected empathy that Deku's sobs hitched in his throat. "You are correct," Wang said, his voice quiet but firm. "You are not a sorcerer." The words were a blow, but Wang wasn't finished. "You are a warrior. A brawler. You have spent your entire life thinking of power as a muscle to be flexed, a weapon to be aimed. You see a problem, and your solution is to punch it harder. That is your training. That is your instinct. And here," he said, gesturing to the void, "it is fundamentally, unequivocally wrong." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "That power inside you, your one for all, you treat it like a limitless battery. You tried to plug it into a system it was not designed for. It would be like trying to run a delicate timepiece by hooking it up to a lightning rod. You are lucky you only scorched your hand. You could have erased yourself from existence." Deku wiped his eyes with the back of his uninjured hand, listening despite the shame that was threatening to consume him. "You feel powerless," Wang continued, his voice softening with an unfamiliar hint of sympathy. "You feel as you did when you were a child because you are, once again, trying to measure yourself by a power you do not possess. You are defining yourself by your failure to wield magic, but that is not why the relics chose you. They did not choose you for the magic you might one day wield. They chose you for the hero you already are." Wang held up his hand, and with a soft, effortless gesture, a small, warm ball of golden light appeared in his palm. "Look at this. To you this is the goal. A thing of power. But you are wrong. This is merely the result. The power is not the point. The process is the point." He then said the words that would change everything. "Your one for all is a flood, Izuka Midoriya. It is a raw, roaring deluge of energy that you struggle to contain behind a dam of muscle and bone. When you fight, you break the dam, letting the floodwaters rage. But magic..." Wang's ball of light pulsed gently. "Magic is a river. It is not contained by force, but guided by its banks. It has a source, it has a path, and it has a destination. A sorcerer does not create the river. He simply shows it where to flow." He looked directly into Deku's soul. "You are trying to break the dam when you need to guide the current. You are trying to force your flood into a riverbed, and it is tearing the landscape apart. You must stop thinking about power. You must stop trying to be strong." Wang clenched his fist, and the ball of light vanished. "You must think only of intent. When I make a shield, I am not thinking, I must be powerful enough to block this attack. I am thinking, this attack will not pass. The universe provides the power to match the conviction. Your conviction is absolute. But your mind is focused on the wrong thing. It's focused on your own strength, your own limitations, your own failures." He stood up, looking down at the boy who was now staring at his own hands with a dawning, fragile understanding. "Your first lesson is over," Wang said. "Your next lesson has nothing to do with spells or gestures. Your task is to go to the Sanctum's library, find a quiet corner, and for the first time in your life, learn to be still. Learn to quiet the storm inside your head. Stop trying to be a hero. Stop trying to be a sorcerer. Just be. When you can sit for 1 hour in total silence, without your mind racing, without your limbs twitching, without muttering a single word of analysis, then, and only then, will you be ready to try again." He turned and walked towards the shimmering doorway that led back to the sanctum, leaving Deku alone on his knees in the silent, starless void. He was still exhausted, his hands still ached, and his heart was still raw. But for the first time since he had arrived in this impossible new world, the path forward wasn't a wall he had to smash through. It was a river he had to learn to follow. And that, he realized, was a challenge that had nothing to do with quirks or magic, and everything to do with the boy he was, and the man he was supposed to become. The Library of Camartage was not a place for the faint of heart, and the New York Sanctum's library was a condensed, potent version of its Himalayan parent. It was less a collection of books and more a silent, breathing menagerie of caged ideas. The air was thick with the scent of ancient paper, dried leather, and a faint, electric tang of ozone that seemed to cling to the very shelves. It was a smell that whispered of forgotten spells, dangerous truths, and the immense, crushing weight of knowledge. And it was here, in this sanctuary of stillness, that Izuku Midoriya was supposed to learn how to be quiet. It was, without a doubt, the most difficult training he had ever endured. He sat cross-legged on a worn but comfortable cushion in a secluded alcove, the cloak of levitation hovering silently in the corner like a patient, crimson sentinel. Wong's instructions had been simple, yet felt as impossible as lifting a mountain. Sit for 1 hour in total silence. Without your mind racing. Without your limbs twitching. Without muttering a single word. He had been trying for 3 days. His current record was 4 minutes and 17 seconds. He closed his eyes, focusing on his breathing, just as Wong had shown him. Inhale, exhale. The silence pressed in on him. It wasn't empty. It was full of the faint hum of the sanctum, the distant, muffled sounds of Bleecker Street, the creak of the ancient floorboards. Okay. Focus. Clear the mind. Be a still pond. But his mind was not a pond. It was a shaken bottle of soda, a beehive kicked over, a frantic, desperate thing that refused to be still. The dust motes dancing in the sunbeam from the window. Are they affected by the ambient magical energy? Do they follow specific ley lines? If I charted their movements, would it reveal a pattern? Maybe a micro-diagram of the sanctum's energy flow? I should be writing this down. His fingers twitched, itching for a pen. No. Stop. Be still. Inhale, exhale. Wong's robes. The weave is incredibly complex. Is it enchanted for protection? Or is it just fabric? The dye is a specific shade of ochre, probably made from a specific mineral, maybe one with thaumaturgical properties. What's its tensile strength? Is it fire-resistant? His left foot began to tap a frantic, silent rhythm against the floor. The book on the shelf to my left. The title is in a language I can't read, but the script looks vaguely like a mix of Sanskrit and something else. Something with too many angles. If I could just decipher the alphabet, I could probably cross-reference it with other texts and build a rudimentary translation matrix. It's just data analysis, really. I could. You are muttering again. Deku's eyes snapped open. Wong was standing at the entrance to the alcove, an unreadable expression on his face. He held 2 steaming mugs, Deku's face flushed with shame. He hadn't even realized he'd started whispering his thoughts aloud. I'm sorry, Wong-san. I'm trying. I really am. I know, Wong said, a surprising lack of judgment in his tone. He handed one of the mugs to Deku. It was filled with a fragrant, herbal tea that smelled of ginger and something sweet, like honey. Your mind is a well-honed weapon, Izuku Midoriya. Asking it to be a peaceful garden overnight is optimistic. Deku took a grateful sip of the tea. The warmth spread through his chest, a small comfort in his sea of failure. How am I supposed to do this? How can anyone just turn their brain off? You do not turn it off, Wong corrected, leaning against a bookshelf. You give it a single point of focus so that the rest may fall silent. For a sorcerer, that point is the spell we are casting. For an acolyte, it is the flame of a candle, the sound of a mantra, the flow of their own breath. Your problem is that your focus is fractured into 1,000 different points at once. You are trying to analyze everything, and in doing so, you master nothing. He looked at the boy, who was now staring forlornly into his tea. Perhaps your method of analysis is the problem. You are trying to apply the logic of your world to the laws of ours. You cannot measure a soul with a ruler. Wong's words were meant to be instructive, but they sparked something else in Deku. A flicker of his old, stubborn defiance. He wasn't trying to measure a soul. He was trying to understand a system, and any system, no matter how complex, could be broken down into its component parts. Wong was telling him to abandon his greatest strength, but what if, instead of abandoning it, he just needed to change his methodology? A fire, small but determined, was rekindled in his eyes. Later that day, after another dozen failed attempts at meditation, he surrendered. Not to despair, but to his own nature. He retrieved his charred, precious notebook from his room. The cover, seared by the energies of the dimensional rift, was a testament to the journey that had brought him here. He opened it to the first clean page. His pen, a simple ballpoint he'd found in a drawer, felt more natural and powerful in his hand than any imaginary wand. At the top of the page, he wrote, his handwriting a familiar, frantic scrawl, Hero Analysis for a Magical World, Volume 1. He wasn't going to try to be a sorcerer anymore. He was going to be an analyst. He was going to do what he had always done. He was going to observe, theorize, and understand. His first entry was an attempt to codify his failure. Subject, Eldritch Magic, Fundamental Principles. Source, External. Wang San calls it multiversal energy. It is ambient, seemingly limitless, but requires a conduit. It is not generated by the user. Conduit, the sorcerer. The user does not create power, but guides it. Wang, the river, not the flood. Catalyst, intent/willpower. This is the most critical and least quantifiable element. The shape of the will determines the shape of the spell. Mechanism, somatic, hand gestures, and verbal/mental, incantations, focus. The gestures are not the spell itself, they are a focusing tool for the mind. Like a baseball pitcher's wind-up, the power comes from the release. Critical failure point, introduction of internal, biological energy sources into the matrix. My attempt to use OFA, 20%, resulted in a violent, explosive rejection. The systems are incompatible. OFA is a force action, Eldritch Magic is a guide action. It's like trying to mix oil and water in a high-speed centrifuge. He paused, chewing on the end of his pen. This was progress. He wasn't just feeling his failure anymore. He was diagramming it. He spent the next several hours creating pages for everything he had seen. The sling ring, the netherwraith, the chalice of whispers, even the cloak of levitation. Subject, cloak of levitation, relic, nature, symbiotic relic. Appears to be sentient, or at least semi-sentient. Abilities, flight, independent action, defensive maneuvers, physical shielding, repositioning of the user. Temperament, inquisitive, protective, somewhat theatrical. Responded to my act of self-sacrifice, not a command. Hypothesis. The relics choose users based on character profile, not power levels. The cloak values courage and a protective instinct. What does the Eye of Agamotto value? This process felt good. It felt right. He was taking the terrifying, incomprehensible chaos of magic and pinning it to the page, organizing it, giving it labels and bullet points. He was building his own garden out of Wang's wilderness. The next day, he approached Wang not as a failed student, but as a researcher. Wang-san, he began, holding up his notebook. I have a few questions for my analysis. Wang looked at the notebook, then at Deku's determined face, and a flicker of something, perhaps amusement, perhaps respect, crossed his features. Very well. Ask. You said the catalyst is intent, Deku said, flipping to a page. But that's too vague. My intent to save you from the chalice was absolute, but I couldn't cast the spell. So it's not just wanting something. What is the qualitative difference between my intent and your intent when you cast the shield? Wang considered this for a long moment. Your intent was a single, explosive moment. A firework. It was pure and powerful, but fleeting. A sorcerer's intent is a forged fire. It is constant, controlled, and maintained. When I create a shield, it is not a desperate wish. It is a statement of fact. I am not hoping the attack will be blocked. I am declaring that this space is under my protection, and reality rearranges itself accordingly. The universe respects conviction, not desperation. Deku scribbled furiously. Conviction. Not desperation. A constant state, not a momentary one. Okay, Deku said, his mind already racing. Second question. The energy. You draw it from other dimensions. Does that mean you can feel it? Like the way I can feel one for all in my muscles? Is it a physical sensation? No, Wang said. And yes. An untrained person feels nothing. An acolyte might feel a slight tingling, a change in atmospheric pressure. A master does not feel the river. He is the river. It is a state of being, an awareness that the air around you is not empty, but a sea of infinite potential. You do not reach for the power. You simply accept that it is already there. State of being. Awareness. Not a physical sensation, but a mental one. Deku's hand was flying across the page. He was getting somewhere. He was building a lexicon, a framework. But he was still missing the key. How could he, Izuku Midoriya, achieve that state of being? His mind was too loud, his power too volatile. The breakthrough came later that night, during another failed meditation session. He was exhausted, his body aching from the lingering backlash of his magical failure, and his mind numb from hours of intense analysis. He wasn't even trying to be still anymore. He was just sitting in the library's silence, his notebook open on his lap, staring at the words he had written: conviction, awareness, a constant state. His eyelids grew heavy. The scent of old paper was lulling him into a strange, twilight state between wakefulness and sleep. His thoughts began to drift, untethered from their usual frantic pace. He remembered All Might, standing on Dagobah Beach, his gaunt face illuminated by the rising sun. He remembered the words his hero had spoken when passing on the sacred torch. It's not just about strength, my boy. This power, it's the crystallization of countless hearts, a chorus of voices all crying out, I want to help. It is the will of generations, focused into a single point. He remembered the sports festival, the moment before his fight with Todoroki, when he had seen them for the first time. The shadowy figures standing behind him. The vestiges, 7 silent silhouettes, their eyes glowing in the darkness of his subconscious. They hadn't felt threatening. They had felt present. A council of silent witnesses. He thought of Nana Shimura, her warm smile and the feel of her hand on his shoulder in his dreams. He thought of the others, their brief appearances, their silent encouragement during his fight with All for One. They were not just memories. They were not just the fuel for his power. They were the power. They were a legacy of will, of intent, the crystallization of countless hearts. A chorus of voices. Conviction. His eyes snapped open. The library was dark, the moon now high in the sky. But for Deku, it was as if 1,000 suns had just ignited in his mind. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding with a revelation so profound it made him feel lightheaded. He had been going about it all wrong. So fundamentally, colossally wrong. He had been treating One for All as the problem, as the incompatible flood of power he needed to suppress. But what if it wasn't the problem? What if it was the solution? Wong had said a sorcerer's intent was a constant, controlled forged fire. Deku's own intent was a firework, bright, pure, but fleeting. He couldn't maintain the state of absolute conviction needed for magic because his mind was too chaotic, his self-doubt too deeply ingrained. But One for All. One for All wasn't just his will. It was the collected, refined, and perfected will of 8 of the world's greatest heroes. It was 8 lifetimes of unwavering conviction, 8 forged fires combined into one blazing star. He had been trying to use OFA as a power source, a physical battery. That was why it failed. He was trying to force the energy of the flood into the riverbed. But he was supposed to be using its will. The will of the vestiges wasn't the flood itself, it was the riverbanks. It was the unshakable, perfectly carved channel that could guide the chaotic waters of the multiverse. He wasn't meant to suppress his quirk. He was meant to use it as a focusing lens, an anchor for his own wavering intent. He would use the unshakable conviction of the vestiges to stabilize his own. He didn't know if it would work. It was a crazy, desperate theory born of exhaustion and inspiration. But it was the first idea that felt truly his, a bridge between the boy he was and the sorcerer he was supposed to become. He didn't wait for morning. He didn't ask Wong for permission. He stood up, his notebook clutched in his hand, and walked with a newfound, resolute purpose towards the chamber of praxis. The cloak of levitation rustled and floated off its chair, following him like a loyal hound. He stood in the center of the silent, starless void. This place had been the site of his greatest failure and humiliation. He was determined to make it the site of his first true victory. He took a deep breath, not of desperation, but of calm resolve. He closed his eyes. First, the power. He reached for One for All, but this time, it was different. He didn't call upon it for a fight. He didn't draw it into his limbs. He called a minuscule amount, just 1%, a whisper of its true strength, and held it, not in his muscles, but in the core of his being. He visualized it as All Might had described it, a warm, steady, emerald flame in his chest. A pilot light. He felt the familiar crackle of green energy, but it wasn't an explosion. It was a soft, internal hum. The lightning did not arc across his skin. It remained contained, a network of fine, glowing veins just beneath the surface. Second, the intent. He focused on the flame in his chest. He reached past his own chaotic thoughts, past his fear and his doubt. He reached for the silent presence he knew was there. He thought of Nana Shimura's sacrifice, of All Might's unwavering smile, of the silent heroes who had carried this burden before him. He wasn't asking for their power. He was asking for their resolve. He let their collective conviction become his own. His mind, for the first time, became still. The roaring hurricane calmed into a steady, powerful wind, all blowing in one direction. The 1,000 fractured points of focus coalesced into one. Protect. Third, the gesture. He opened his eyes. They were glowing with a soft, emerald light. He raised his hands, the movements slow, deliberate, and perfect. He moved them through the familiar pattern of the eldritch shield. This time, as his fingers carved through the air of the void, they left a trail behind them. But it wasn't orange. It was a brilliant, vibrant, emerald green, the exact shade of One for All's lightning. The lines of the spell were sharp and clear, crackling with a faint, contained energy. He brought his hands together. The pattern solidified. A spinning, three-dimensional disk of pure energy flared into existence over his forearm. It was a shield. A perfect, stable, humming shield. It was not the serene, golden mandala that Wang created. This one was different. It was a furious, living thing. It was composed of the same complex geometric patterns, but they were emerald green instead of orange, and they spun with a fierce energy. Tiny, harmless bolts of green lightning arced across its surface, crackling and spitting like a miniature storm. It hummed not with a gentle warmth, but with a palpable, kinetic potential, the controlled energy of a coiled spring. It was a shield that didn't just want to defend, it wanted to push back. It was beautiful. It was his. He stared at it, his breath caught in his throat. A wide, trembling, watery grin spread across his face. He had done it. He had actually done it. Tears of pure, unadulterated joy and relief welled in his eyes, blurring the image of his creation. A single sob of triumph escaped him. Incredible. The voice, low and filled with undisguised awe, made Deku jump. Wang was standing at the entrance to the chamber, his arms crossed. He must have sensed the sudden, controlled surge of power. He was staring at the crackling green shield on Deku's arm with an expression of profound astonishment. I have never, Wang said slowly, walking closer, seen anything like it. You have not drawn power from the multiverse. You have infused it with your own. You have colored the river. Deku, beaming, let the shield dissolve into a shower of harmless green sparks. I didn't. Not really. I just used One for All as an anchor. A focusing crystal for my will. The power is still from the multiverse, I think, but my quirk, it's like it's filtering it, giving it my signature. He was talking a mile a minute, gesturing wildly with his notebook. The vestiges, their will, it stabilizes mine. It allows me to hold the conviction you were talking about. It's a bridge. He took a deep breath, the grin on his face so wide it made his cheeks ache. He needed to give it a name. It was a fusion of his old life and his new one. I'm calling it Full Cowl, Mystic Style. Wang raised an eyebrow at the bombastic name but didn't comment on it. His mind was already working, processing the implications. This is unprecedented. A symbiotic fusion of a biological energy source and a metaphysical art. Show me again. The shield. Deku nodded eagerly. He activated his new 1% mystic style, and the emerald shield sprang back into existence, humming with power. It feels solid, Deku said, marveling at it. But it's draining. Not my muscles, not like a smash. It's draining my mind. My stamina. It's like trying to solve 1,000 complex math problems at once while also running a sprint. As it should be, Wang said, his expression turning serious, professional. You have opened a new door. Now we see how sturdy it is. Without another word, Wang's hands moved, and a whip of orange eldritch energy lashed out, striking Deku's shield. Crack! The impact was jarring. The sound of the two energies meeting was like a thunderclap. Deku grunted, his feet sliding back a few inches on the stone floor. His shield held, but the green light flickered violently. The strain was immense. He could feel his concentration being taxed to its absolute limit. Again, Wang commanded. He sent another lash, then another. A bolt of golden energy. A concussive blast. He wasn't trying to harm Deku, but he wasn't holding back either. He was testing the limits of this new, bizarre technique. Deku stood his ground, his teeth gritted, sweat pouring down his face. He poured every ounce of his focus into maintaining the shield, into holding that state of conviction anchored by the silent heroes within him. The emerald light of his shield flared and dimmed with every blow, but it did not break. After a final, powerful blast that sent a spiderweb of cracks across the shield's surface, Wang stopped. Deku collapsed to one knee, panting, his entire body trembling with exhaustion. The shield dissolved, not into sparks this time, but into a fizzling wisp of green smoke. The 1% hum of his quirk faded, leaving a profound mental fatigue in its wake. He felt like he'd just taken a final exam for every subject at once. But he was smiling. Wang looked down at him, and for the first time, the boy saw a genuine, unguarded expression on the sorcerer's face. It was a look of deep, profound respect. "The form is raw," Wang said, his voice laced with an undeniable hint of pride. "The energy cost is unsustainable. Your technique is a clumsy, brutish thing." He paused, then allowed himself a small, rare smile. "But it is yours. And it is strong." He offered a hand to Deku. The boy took it, and Wang pulled him to his feet. "The training is far from over, Sorcerer Supreme," Wang said, the title sounding less like a burden and more like a challenge now. "But today you have taken your first step." Deku stood tall, exhausted but resolute, the phantom hum of his new power still echoing in his soul. He had a long, impossible road ahead of him. He still needed to master this power, to find Dr. Strange, to save his friends, to find a way home. But as he stood there, in the silent void, he was no longer just a lost boy in a strange land. He was no longer a fraud, an imposter, or a mistake. He had found his own unique magic. He was Izuku Midoriya, and he was ready to learn.